Well, if you think Lydia Thorpe has any regrets over her confrontation with King Charles earlier this week, think again. When asked this afternoon about the King's genuine affection for Indigenous people, which was evident during his visit, Thorpe had this to say.
Well, that's called smoothing the dying pillow. We'll just say some niceties along the way while we continue to commit genocide against First Peoples in this country. I'm sorry, Charlie, but you can't come here and think that you can say a few nice words about our people while you still have stolen goods. You are in receipt of stolen goods, which makes you complicit in theft.
Charlie. And as for calls for her to resign, well, have a listen.
I'm not giving up my job. I'm not resigning. I don't listen to the noise of those who have chosen to assimilate into the colonial system.
Well, for a woman who's chosen not to assimilate into the colonial system, Lydia Thorpe does seem to be doing rather well. She's racking up thousands of dollars in taxpayer-funded interstate travel, as well as benefiting from a membership to the VIP Qantas Chairman's Lounge. Oh, and that system that she's not assimilated into also pays her a salary of more than $230,000 a year, plus an extra $25,000 because she chairs a committee. So that's $250,000 taxpayer dollars, plus other privileges. Imagine if she had assimilated. Joining me is Daniel Wild, Deputy Executive Director of the Institute of Public Affairs, and Sky News contributor Evelyn Ray. Evelyn, Lydia Thorpe isn't going to resign, but she loves the controversy. This is what she does.
Oh, absolutely. This is exactly what she does. And James, it's because it's all that she can do. You know, short of a good idea to make Australia a better place for everybody, the only thing she can do to maintain any form of relevance is to resort to these childish stunts. I mean, look, it's a sham. She's not a serious person, let alone politician. I think it was not long ago that her father even came out and admitted that she has English ancestry. And yet somehow, shocker, she figured out a way to forgive and live with herself. So, you know, I think it's about time she learned how to do that with everybody else in this country.
Indeed. Daniel, what's the point of swearing allegiance to the Crown, as Lydia Thorpe did, if you then denounce the Crown to the King's face? If she won't resign, shouldn't she be removed? Otherwise, the oath of allegiance is effectively pointless and a bit of a joke, is it not?
Well, exactly, James. I mean, there's 76 senators across Australia, 12 of whom are from Victoria, and Lydia Thorpe is one of them. Yet she's the oppressed one. I'm not too sure how that works. As you say, she's pulling in $250,000 salary. She's not doing too bad, but just like Evelyn said, this is really her stock in trade, provoking and causing controversy to get a headline, and that's exactly what she's gotten out of it. Let's not forget that she's only in the Senate because she was elected as a part of the Greens ticket. She then abandoned ship because the Greens weren't to the left, to her liking, not far enough to the left. So I think this is going to drag on for many months, and we're going to see a lot more of this, unfortunately, up until the next time she's up for election, James.
Daniel, Communications Minister Michelle Rowland loves to tell us that surveys show 80% of Australians are concerned about so-called misinformation. What she doesn't mention is that doesn't necessarily then mean they want the government to start censoring all of us. In fact, a new poll from the IPA shows 65% of Australians are concerned that the government's proposed misinformation laws could be used for political purposes. Now, I guess that means Australians aren't stupid, but tell us more about this poll, Daniel. What else does it reveal?
Well, thanks, James. Look, what it reveals is that Australians don't support these very bad laws, and they don't support them for three reasons. The first is that they would be the biggest attack on freedom of speech in Australia's peacetime history, because it would empower an unelected bureaucracy to define the truth and then enforce that truth on mainstream Australians. Secondly, it's an unfair two-tiered system because you've got professional news organisations, academia and others in elite society that are actually exempt from the laws. So it doesn't matter what they say, there's no penalties. But if a mainstream Australian, someone listening to your program now, were to say the exact same thing on their Facebook or some other social media platform, they could be censored under these laws. And third, it would be a censor first, ask questions later regime, because the social media giants will be hit with a fine of up to 5% of their global revenue if they fail to censor what's considered misinformation. But there's no countervailing incentive to encourage freedom of speech or debate on their platforms. So this is a massive weaponisation of these big tech companies against mainstream Australians. And as you say, Australians aren't silly. They know exactly what's going to happen, which is the government is going to shut down debate and dissent in this country.
Yeah, so 80% of Australians are concerned about misinformation, but almost 70% of them say that doesn't mean that we want the government interfering. Daniel, while we're talking about IPA analysis, you've done some analysis on Australian university students who are dropping out at record numbers. Just 62% of students are completing a degree within 6 years. And of course, taxpayers are footing these HECS bills, many of which will never be repaid. What's the issue?
Well, that's right. It's not just that. It's that at the same time as you've got plummeting rates of graduation for domestic students, you've got skyrocketing rates of graduation for foreign students. And so it goes to the point that universities are now just factories for backdoor visa entry of those who would otherwise probably never attain a visa. Now, I've got nothing against the students themselves. Of course you'd want to come to Australia. What a great country and what a great opportunity. So good luck to them. But, universities have lost their way. They've, getting all this money and the rivers of gold from the international students, but that's not being shared with the community. In fact, the community bear the costs in terms of the rental situation, international students taking up the rental market and other social pressures. So we're seeing a collapse of universities. They're not providing good services for domestic students because they're catering towards the international market. And that's why we need a hard cap on international students that's well below the one that the government is currently proposing, James.
I do love it when the left self-flagellate. I want to talk about the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, who has just discovered he's related to a slave owner. It turns out his great-great-great-grandfather owned slaves in Jamaica, and a recent trip to the area helped him to confront the legacies of enslavement in the Caribbean. Now, Evelyn, the Archbishop of Canterbury has approved a plan to set aside £100 million of parishioners' money to address the church's involvement in the slave trade. Do you think he'll now be pulling out his own wallet now that his great-great-great-grandfather was a slave owner?
I doubt that he will. But look, James, he really should just resign in disgrace for all of this. It certainly wouldn't hurt the church either. Worse than his ancestry is his theology. If the Archbishop were a little bit more familiar with the Bible, he'd be aware of the fact that God says the Son shall not suffer for the sins of the Father. Absent of real oppression, we now have folks scouring Ancestry.com for guilty bloodlines. I mean, can you believe that? But of course, this whole shtick is just another pretext for the confiscation of white man's property, being the taxpayer money. Communism always comes as an angel of light, and this is exactly that.